Welcome to the second in our Sabeel-Kairos series, Apartheid in Advent. My name is Stephen, and I'm chairing today's presentation. We're delighted to have two guest speakers tonight, or today, Sylvia Marcos and John Manaya, and I will introduce them in a moment more fully. But in terms of some basic housekeeping, please remain muted. Charlotte will mute everyone when Sylvia and John are speaking, so please do not unmute yourself. And after Sylvia and John have spoken, there will be an opportunity for you to ask one of them a question. And you can do this in one of two different ways. On your version of Zoom, there may be an opportunity at the bottom to click a hand symbol, which is a way of raising your hand digitally, and we will be able to see that, and it will indicate to us that you have a question for us. If you don't have that feature, then please use the chat facility and ask your question there, and I will read that question out or invite you to ask that question at that time when we realize you have a question. Two very basic observations about questions. The first is that if you want to ask a question, it has to have a question mark at the end of the sentence. And secondly, if you have to take a deep breath, then the sentence is too long. So it's one question mark, and one breath. So we look forward to our evening together on the theme of colonialism and apartheid. And so I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Sylvia Marcos. It's a delight to have you with us today, Sylvia. Sylvia is an academic, a professor, and university researcher committed to indigenous movements in the Americas at several institutions, including the University Iberoamericana in Mexico City. Sylvia is a leading promoter of the review of feminist epistemology, that's feminist study, Mesoamerican religions, and women in indigenous movements. Sylvia is a defender of feminist hermeneutics, theory and practice. We look forward to hearing your presentation. Sylvia, the floor is yours.
So good morning, good afternoon for all of you. I think the first thing I want to say is I have Palestinian ancestry. My grandparents came from Bethlehem to Mexico in the 1920s of last century. I am not very how can I say this? My English is quite limited. I hope that you can understand me. On my mother's side, there was a Palestinian grandfather that came directly from Bethlehem, but there was an indigenous woman from Mexico that was my grandmother. And I'm telling you this because this gives a situation. We are, academically, we are very much, as feminists especially, methodologically, we are asking very much to feel the situation of your knowledge. So whatever I will be telling you, it is very important that you know that I have an indigenous grandmother and a Palestinian grandmother that came from Bethlehem. Besides this, it is important to know that I have been a Sabeel member I have been to Jerusalem several times. I have been to several events, international congresses, to always 2-3 times I have been there. It's always to know the situation, the concrete situation the Palestinians are living through. And the most important thing of Sabeel is this compromise, political compromise for peace. Being in this very unjust social situation, we are, as Palestinians, we are claiming to defend the Palestinian injustices that are happening now. We are claiming to find a peaceful way. And this is very typical of Sabeel. Sabeel is ecumenical, to my knowledge. I have been invited by Naim Atik. And so with this background, you know where my voice is coming from. My voice is coming from defending the colonialism that we suffered in Mexico as indigenous population. And this is my grandmother that in this moment, she is speaking through me. And so I had a great sympathy for the Sabeel struggles, and this is why I have been going there and supporting and teaching. I have done seminars with Sabeel in Jerusalem. A couple of years ago I was there, and but several times, like I told you. So I am very close to the commitments of Sabeel in Jerusalem, but I am also very committed to the colonialism that has been hampering and making suffering the indigenous populations of Mexico. So my view, and I will please ask you to get this book. Do you see it? It's called Taken from the Lips, Gender and Eros in Mesoamerican Religions. And this is the place from which I'm speaking. I'm speaking not from Catholicism, I'm speaking from the perspective of what we have been working on. And I have been working this with several bishops like Don Samuel Ruiz from Chiapas, and we have been constructing a theology that's not simply a liberation theology, like Palestinian liberation theology is very close to us, but we still speak of an indigenous theology, Theologia India. And this means incorporating the way the indigenous populations that were severely struck and destroyed with the conquest of the Americas, the European arriving, and you are English mainly, so you arrived to the US. We had the arrival of the Spanish conquerors. But anyway, the strategies of colonialism are very similar. And we are very connected to the struggles of the Native Americans in the US that suffered the English colonialism. But I am speaking and I am working with the Spanish colonialism. And I am respecting and reporting on the contemporary, not the 500 years ago, but the contemporary scars that the indigenous people have on their own way of conceiving God and conceiving the forces of nature and conceiving the way the feminine and the masculine are thought about. we are trying and building a theology, a feminist indigenous theology. I have just given a very, very important keynote address to this Department of Ciencias Religiosas of this Jesuit university in Mexico City, which is one of the best universities in Mexico, the Jesuit University Iberoamericana. And I had to speak, and my keynote was called Cuerpo y Género en Mesoamérica para una teología feminista descolonial. So if you understand a little, I will try to translate it, body and gender for a feminist decolonial theology. And this is what I am working in, and this is what I can speak of. And of course, the things I can say about colonialism are horrible, and they are as horrible as apartheid in Jerusalem or in Ramallah. I was in Ramallah many times, and I was collaborating with Sabeel, with these meetings with Israeli forces, and we tried to build a conversation. But this conversation, and there was one of these big efforts in which I participated with some bishops, Orthodox bishops, and we participated in these dialogues, and I don't see any results till today, and the fierceness and the horror of the occupation of Jerusalem have become even worse than the last time I was there. And it was just a few years ago. So this is every time that I get news from Palestine, my heart shrinks more and more. And it's also, and my heart is shared with the indigenous populations of Mexico, because they are being massacred also. The nation state, which is a nation state that's based on capitalist economy, it's destroying and dispossessing massively the indigenous populations. So from the religious point of view, you know, as a theologian, as a feminist theologian, I am defending the rights of these people, of the indigenous peoples that are very different to Catholic, or you can say they are different to Protestant also. They have a conceptualization of earth as sacred, and all this complication of the capitalist economy destroying nature, the climate problem, the poisoning of the seas, poisoning of rivers, all of this is based on the economic capitalist system. So you have to be politically aware also. And you have to consider that for the indigenous, and I think this is all I have to say now, because I have a very short time, and you have to read me, but let's stay with the sacredness of earth. Earth was not nature that you can exploit and take as much from it. Earth, it was sacred, is sacred for indigenous populations, for the Native Americans that suffered the English colonialism, and for the Latin American or the Mexican indigenous, many hundreds of indigenous populations in all Latin America. For them, earth is sacred, and hollering the earth to get petroleum and to get all this gasolina and all of this, it's just doing an enormous sin to this sacred being that is earth. And so just keep this in mind, because I cannot go any further, but keep in mind this difference between certain of your Catholic or Christian beliefs towards nature and the beliefs of the indigenous populations towards nature. Earth is sacred, remember, and earth is not exploited and destroyed within the indigenous religious universes. It's not the kind of exploitation that we are suffering in late capitalism, capitalism, and I hope that you as Christians are also against this exploitation of earth as a sacred being. And thank you very much. I hope you understood.
Sylvia, thank you very much for that introduction. Very grateful indeed. And we look forward to the questions and answer in a little while, when people can ask direct questions to you about how this feminist indigenous theology is challenging nation states based on capitalist colonialism. What you shared was very moving, and it resonates with our own experience of what's happening in Palestine today. So thank you for that introduction. I'm going to turn now to our second speaker. It's a delight to have John Munaya with us. John is a Palestinian theologian from Jerusalem who holds degrees from King's College London, University of Edinburgh, and the University of Amsterdam. John is interested in researching and writing about Palestinian theology and Christianity, as well as interreligious dialogue. And in the hyperlink on the Sabeel-Kairos website, you'll notice he's recently published an article for Edinburgh University Press, Decolonising Palestinian Liberation Theology, New Methods, Sources and Voices. So I commend that article to you in particular. John, it's a delight to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone, especially given the fact that England are playing at the moment in the World Cup. So hopefully we'll be listening both to what I have to say, but also keeping an eye on the score at the moment. Is it possible to share my screen? The host disabled it, sorry. Okay, perfect. I'll also situate myself. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I think it follows very well. I am interested also, as Stephen mentioned, in indigenizing and decolonizing Palestinian theology. If you do have a chance to read the article, but hopefully I'll give a bit of a glimpse today in this short talk. I hope everyone can see my screen, and I won't go too much into detail in terms of why Zionism is a form of colonialism or the different forms of apartheid that are manifested in historical Palestine. I think the previous session that you had gave a good background to that. So hopefully I can focus in this very short talk on decolonial approaches, which is what I'm interested in. And the reason why I'm interested in this is specifically because of my personal journey. I thought that I would receive a lot of answers to some of the questions I have, also theological questions that I have in theological books, in studying in universities in the UK. And actually, I found a lot of the questions elsewhere, whether that be amongst Palestinian farmers or even shepherds. This is sort of the idea and the background that is pushing forward both my theological work and this short presentation. So let's begin. When I speak about colonialism or coloniality, I'd like to make to make a point that these two terms are different. Colonialism on one hand and coloniality on the other. Coloniality refers to a matrix that is essentially dominating the way we understand ourselves, the way we understand the world, our economy, different subjects such as gender, power, sexuality, and more. Colonialism refers specifically to the traditional political, social, and economic denomination of one political entity over another. So whilst Palestine at the moment is experiencing actual colonialism, I want to also pay attention to coloniality, because this has a significant effect on the way we think Palestinians, but also those abroad, how we think about Palestine, how we think about the UK, how we think about ourselves. And again, a lot has been said about colonialism also in the previous lecture and also in the previous ones to come. And therefore, I want to focus on coloniality, this matrix that has influenced the way we see the world. And oftentimes people, you know, in conversations with people, they often say, John, listen, I'm not in favor of colonialism. I am against racism. I am not a racist. And what I like to reply to them by saying is that we're all affected by coloniality. The very nature, the very way we look at the world, the way we understand God himself is affected by larger systems, different productions of knowledge that have influenced us, whether that be through school, university, our family, so on and so forth. And therefore, this is why I focus on coloniality. So I want to disrupt this type of matrix, the coloniality that is based on white supremacy, that is based on capitalism, that is based on the abuse of the world and the resources that the world offers us. I am interested in disrupting these systems, these forces, the power behind the way people think about Palestine and other situations. So I'm very much also standing in solidarity with other people groups that are also suffering from the different forms of coloniality and colonialism, which also Sylvia mentioned. And therefore, I put two pictures that you can see in the presentation. The first one is one of the covers for Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Masks. When I say that, you can see that he's peeling off the white skin off of his black skin, peeling off the white mask off his black skin. I'm not referring literally at the moment to the color, right? When he's peeling off the white mask, I'm thinking about the mask of coloniality that we all have been brought up with, including us here in Palestine. The way we understand the world, the way we understand God, that has been influenced by colonialism and white supremacy. So this is what I mean by disrupting the matrix. We need to try together to take off the white masks that often lead to different forms of oppression. At the same time, I also want to situate this type of disruption with the birth story of Jesus Christ. And you can see here a painting of Slimane Mansour, a famous Palestinian artist, that is depicting the birth story in contemporary Palestine, with the apartheid wall, with the soldiers who are maintaining the occupation. So hopefully we will both use the story of the birth of Jesus and trying to disrupt the masks that we wear, to try and pull them off, and hopefully we can help others pull it off as well. The first point, colonizing beings. Oftentimes within the colonial matrix that has spread throughout the world and maintains to dominate productions of knowledge and beings, decide who is human and who is subhuman. And I also emphasize here, superhuman. So when we want to decolonize and disrupt this matrix of coloniality, we need to challenge hierarchies. the way we decide who is a human and who is subhuman and perhaps superhuman. And in Palestine, in the Palestinian context, Palestinians are depicted as subhuman. And the Israelis are depicted as, I would say, superhuman. They're more important than the average human. So when we discuss decolonizing beings, we need to decolonize the way we position people. And it's not just Palestinian and Israeli. In the UK, you can think about your own terms of who is considered human and who is considered subhuman, whether that be migrants, refugees, the way the British government has been speaking about refugees, and other categories as well, men, women, so on and so forth. So we have to examine the language. Who is describing who, and how are they describing them? So when we are trying to decolonize certain beings and the language we use, we need to pay attention to this. This is key. And when I think about the Christmas story, I think it's an amazing way of decolonizing beings. The angels are revealing themselves to the shepherds who were considered as the lowest class within first century Palestine, those who were not considered that wealthy or important by human measure, but were humble people. So in a way, the angels appearing to the shepherds, God revealing himself to these humble groups, he is reaffirming their humanity. And I think this is a great way for us also practically to decolonize humans, the way we understand the different groups in society. So we often need to look at where God is revealing himself and the work of the Holy Spirit. Moving on quickly to the second point, we need to decolonize knowledge. We need to decolonize the way we decide what is considered knowledge. So for instance, in my recent theological work, I am not so much interested in looking into fancy theological books that have been written by very smart people. I am interested in the way people live their life as a theological source, the way Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians, live their life. And I think we together need to decolonize the way we produce our own knowledge. And when, of course, the method changes, when it's not so much focusing on books, but perhaps lived theology, the sources change. So we need to always question, who are we relying on for understanding the world and for understanding God? And of course, in our context, both God and Palestine. And here I use the Magi, who, as an example for decolonizing the production of knowledge, is that they initially were following the star. They were following God, who was leading them to Jesus. But they decided not to continue following the star, but to go to the chief priests and the scholars in Jerusalem. So it's often a temptation that we have to follow these sort of big scholars or governments in terms of how we understand the world and God. So we need to be careful not to be tempted to deviate from the star that is leading us to Christ and the liberation of all people, and then go to other, perhaps scholarly sources. Another theme from the birth story. And I will go very quickly because I know I'm supposed to be very short. But the third point that I would like to think about during this Christmas season is decolonizing Jesus himself. Disrupting the way Jesus has been portrayed as a white European who is blonde with blue eyes. We need to look at Jesus through our contemporary eyes. And in Palestine, I would challenge us to think about this as a Palestinian, because Christ manifested himself as a first century Jew. He manifested himself as someone who lived under oppression. And Jesus essentially takes on the identity of those who are oppressed. So hopefully during this Christmas season, we can think about Jesus as a Palestinian, Jesus as an African American, Jesus as an indigenous person, right? We need to decolonize the way we understand Jesus and the way we portray him in our lives today. And I'll leave with a final question for everyone to think about, but if Christ was to be born in Palestine today, where would we find him? Where would he be born? Would he be born to a Palestinian Christian family, or maybe to another family? So that's just something, some food for thought, the rest of the talk. Thank you very much.
John, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very stimulating and challenging to have those three headings, Decolonising Beings, Decolonising Knowledge, and then Decolonising Jesus. That was very helpful, and I look forward to our discussion. It was also helpful to see how you elaborated on and developed the thesis which Sylvia began our presentation with. Thank you.